Hebrews chapter number 9 today and verse number 6. Now when these things were thus ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But into the second went the high priest alone, once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. The Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks, and divers washings, and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. Now, we've dealt with the articles of furniture that we found beginning at verse number 3 and 4, 2, 3, and 4. And then we have dealt with the three items that are inside the Ark of the Covenant, the golden pot of manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and a copy of the Ten Commandments. We've dealt with the mercy seat and the cherubim that provide the covering for the Ark of the Covenant. Today we move forward in verse number 6. Now when these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. When these things were thus ordained, when God had put the matter of the tabernacle into operation, and the priesthood, the tabernacle was built, it's sanctified, the priesthood was established, and now the priesthood and the operation of the priesthood is now underway. When these things were thus ordained, the priest went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. Now, I pointed this out before, but the first tabernacle would be a reference back to verse number 2. For there was a tabernacle made, the first, wherein was the candlestick and the table and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. We refer to this as the holy place. Paul refers to it in the King James text as the first tabernacle. It is one and the same. So there's the golden candlestick, there's the table of showbread, and there were 12 loaves that were kept on the table of showbread. 12 loaves, 12, a divine number, and the number of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the golden altar of incense. So the priest would go into the first part of the tabernacle. We call that again the holy place, accomplishing the service of God. He would burn the incense, he would trim the lamps, he would accomplish the daily details of the service of the Lord. The table of showbread was there, which was there for the priesthood and the Levites to eat, and to accomplish the daily details of the service of the Lord. The busy work, if you please, involved the service of the Lord. And even today, there are many busy details that must be attended to in the work of the ministry. Dr. Jerry Honeycutt told me one time, and he's had a Bible school in Rome Mountain, and I serve on the board of that school. He's had that Bible school for 30 years or more, and has graduated many hundreds of preachers. And many of the preachers that have come through that school, I've had the honor of preaching for them and standing in their pulpits down through the years. One of the greatest doors I have enjoyed in my ministry has been related to the VBC, Victory Baptist Institute, out of Victory Baptist Church in Rome Mountain, Tennessee. Anyway, Dr. Honeycutt told me many years ago, and I've never forgotten this, he said the 90% of the work of the ministry is work. And he said that's the greatest problem young preachers have with it, is that it involves work. There is much busy work to be done concerning the ministry. I have written many books. I have 5 manuscripts right now that I'm working on in various stages of being completed. We are trying now to get a brand new edition of my grandfather's book, Why Do Christians Suffer? And then the sermon, The Ministry of Tears, is going to be in that volume. And then I have several sermons that I have written over the years that will also go into that book. It'll be a nice, handsome volume. It has been completely retypeset and edited. It'll be very easy to read. And we're anxious now to get that in from the printer and to be able to make it available to my listeners. And then immediately behind that, Will America Go into Paganism, which was out of print whenever my grandfather died 25 years ago, and we put it back in print, and it's now out of print again. And that book has been entirely retypeset and is ready to go back to the printer. So I have a lot of irons in the fire concerning our writing ministry. But it's interesting that though I attempt to write every day, there are some days I'm not able to write because I am preoccupied writing letters to confirm revival meetings and writing letters to thank preachers for allowing me to come, writing letters. Everyone that writes to the Bright Spot Hour and sends an offering, it's a letter in the return mail, and I hand address. Every envelope I hand address, and I sign every letter. I don't run it through a machine. I don't have a stamp, a signature stamp. Every one of those are signed. And I fold the letter up and put the return envelope in it and seal the letter, and I put the stamp on it. I carry it to the post office, put the mail in the post office. The work, W-O-R-K, the busy work of the ministry. And I'm not complaining. I rejoice. If I didn't have the listeners, I wouldn't have the Bright Spot Hour. And if I didn't have the Bright Spot Hour, I would not have the opportunity to stand before so many people on the 35 radio stations. We've just taken a couple new ones on. We may be up to 37 radio stations now. I wouldn't have the door I have. And so the busy work is a part of it. It's kind of like changing the oil and transmission fluid in your vehicle. If you didn't have a vehicle, you wouldn't need to service the transmission and change the motor oil, rotate the tires, wash it and clean it out. But because you have a vehicle, and there's such a huge advantage of having an automobile, then there's busy work that goes along with that, and maintenance work that goes along with that. I have to spend time working on my house. My wife and I have done a tremendous amount of work on our house last winter, around from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and we're working on the house now in the spring, doing some pretty heavy remodel work in our bathrooms. And I rejoice. Yes, the work is tedious and tiresome and expensive, terribly expensive. But I rejoice in the prospect of doing the work, because if I didn't have a house, I wouldn't have anything to remodel. But now that I have a house, then I can remodel it. But the advantage of the house, I have a place to go, a place to stay warm, a place for my wife to be safe. I have a place to live with my wife. I have a place for my grandson and my children to come and my in-laws and so on. If I didn't have the house, I couldn't have my family in at Christmas. We had 35, 36 people in, immediate family in last Christmas in our home. And we prepared a meal and fed them and had a wonderful time together. If I didn't have a house, I couldn't have them over. So the priests were occupied in the Old Testament with much work concerning the tabernacle. It was not all intercessory prayer and sacrifices. Just like the ministry today is not all preaching. The ministry today is occupied with much more than just preaching. We are occupied with hospital visits and shut-in visits and nursing home visits. In my work in evangelism, I'll spend 5 hours, 4 hours a day in the automobile, 2 hours going, 2 hours coming back, 4 hours in the automobile just to be in a service that lasts an hour and 15 minutes. So I spend much more time getting there and getting home than I actually do in the service. So there are many busy details that the priests and the Levites had to be occupied with, all the way down to cooking the showbread. Some Levite had to bake the unleavened bread that went on the table of showbread 12 loaves had to be kept there all the time so that the Levites and priests would have something to eat. Somebody had to be occupied with the constant repair the tabernacle demanded. Somebody had to supervise the raising of the sheep and goats that would be used in sacrifice on the Day of Atonement. Much, much busy work. And that's dealt with in verse number 6. Now when these things were thus ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. Accomplishing the service of God. It's my opinion one of the reasons that some men's ministries never amount to much is because they are not willing to accomplish the service of God. They're just not willing to invest the energy and the effort that is demanded to see the ministry go forward, to see the ministry work. There's not a man on earth believes the sovereignty of God any more than I do. But the Bible is very clear about the area of human responsibility. And in these meetings that I have the honor of holding, and I've never asked anyone for a meeting. I've never asked for a meeting. But I've always had a place to preach. But I learned this from my grandfather. Every meeting before about 4 weeks out, they get a letter confirming the dates. And then about 4 weeks behind the meeting, they get a letter thanking me for, thanking the pastor for allowing me to come. And if I give a man a date, I'll be there unless I'm in the hospital. I will be there to preach for him. The execution of the work, W-O-R-K, that's a bad word in society today, the work of the Lord.
The Bright Spot Hour, Post Office Box 4, Greenville, South Carolina 296.